of mine once said that Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition would have been received better if it was called by a different name. Well, that actually happened. So today, we're going to look at how this game, Double Cross, stacks up to Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. Let's get some obvious differences out of the way first. Dungeons & Dragons is the example of role-playing games. Anytime I need to explain what one of my myriad of more obscure games I'm playing is, this is my point of reference. Double Cross, on the other hand, is a lesser-known game from Japan that was recently translated and published into English. Though based on some translation notes I've read about other games, this is currently my example of Japanese role-playing games. Double Cross is similar to a lot of other games from Japan, and there's a legit English release of it. The settings are also wildly different. Dungeons & Dragons is famous enough that you could use circular logic to describe its setting, and people will get it. Though if they don't, you could just as easily say it's like anything by J.R.R. Tolkien. Meanwhile, Double Cross takes place in a more familiar setting, our own world, but with a few differences, like a virus that causes mutations in people. Those differences are pretty inconsequential though. The game mechanics are where the games really stand apart. The most obvious being that D&D makes use of the standard polyhedral set we're all familiar with, while Double Cross prefers to stick with just 10-sided dice. Double Cross also eschews using grids like Dungeons & Dragons tends to, preferring instead to use an abstract measurement called engagements. Here's kind of a picture of what I mean. And there's also the encroachment rate stat in Double Cross. That measures how strong the virus is in your character and how close they are to becoming the same sort of monsters they're fighting. Nothing like that is similar in Dungeons & Dragons outside of the Ravenloft setting, because if encroachment rate gets too high, you lose control of your character. The final thing I can think of that separates the two games is how a character's abilities improve. Dungeons & Dragons uses the all-too-familiar level system, where you obtain a certain amount of experience points from completing objectives and slaying monsters. Obtain enough, and you reach a new plateau of power complete with a new array of perks. Double Cross, on the other hand, still uses experience points, but the amount of monsters you fight doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how much you gain. Experience points are then used to improve specific parts of your character that you, the player, see fit, instead of just sort of arbitrarily gaining new powers every so often. The similarities between both games are probably not as numerous as the differences. However, much of the complaints I've heard about Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition are also present in Double Cross. For starters, in both games, a bulk of the rules revolve around combat, and in character creation, much of your choices revolve around how will my character be used to kill enemies. Specifically, in both Dungeons & Dragons and Double Cross, you make choices about what sort of powers you want your character to have, and the powers you have are restricted by a choice you make upon creating your character. For Dungeons & Dragons, this is your class, but in Double Cross, it's your choice of syndromes that govern your power options. Though according to some notes I found about Far East Amusement Research's games, the development name for your choice of syndromes in Double Cross would have been your character's class. Both games also have quite a few rules regarding how encounters should be put together, and both games use combat-oriented confrontations as the crux and climax, with a few interspersed sections relying more on a character's non-combat skills. As an example, Dungeons & Dragons has numerous tables in their Dungeon Master's Guide regarding how to ideally set up combat encounters. One such method being to choose monsters based on how much experience they give, and to keep a tally of how much experience all the monsters in an encounter give, and not to exceed a number based on the average character level of the party. Double Cross has a somewhat similar method that doesn't rely on as many charts, but still requires a bit of mathematics. For a battle with only one enemy, such as like a big boss or something, you determine roughly how long you want the battle to last in combat rounds, and then determine the average amount of damage your players can deal in one combat action. When you've got those two numbers, you multiply them together, and that's about how much HP you should give to the enemy. One of the biggest gripes I recall people having with the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons was healing surges, as well as how hit points worked. Hit points in 4th edition represented your character's will to keep pressing on despite wounds and hardship. To that end, healing surges were your character's ability to shrug off said hardship. Many things in the game relied on healing surges, such as potions and certain powers. But if you guessed that they were used when your character could normally heal, You'd be correct. The thing that was odd about them, though, was that they were also a hard limit on how often your character could heal. When you ran out of healing surges, you became very limited in the ways you could restore your HP. In a few ways, this is similar in scope to how encroachment rate functions in Double Cross, albeit with a different focus. Your character's encroachment rate in Double Cross increases as you use your powers, with some raising it higher than others. One power every character has access to is called Resurrection. Resurrection brings an incapacitated character back with a random amount of HP, and further raises your encroachment rate by the same amount of HP that you regain. This power, however, becomes unusable after your encroachment rate goes over 100. Other powers, however, still allow reviving incapacitated characters, as well as restoring HP to a character who otherwise might have lost some, but is not incapacitated. The final topic I want to cover is the release date of the games. The original publishing of Double Cross was in 2001 in Japan, with Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition being published 7 years later in 2008. However, Double Cross's 3rd edition was published in 2009, and is the edition that the English version of the game is based on. Incidentally, the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons was the last edition to receive an international release in other languages, and among the languages 4th edition was translated into was Japanese. I don't mean to imply that Double Cross 3rd edition copied Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, though. In fact, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt to Double Cross for 2 reasons. First, there's still plenty of difference between the 2 games. Second, and most importantly, Dungeons & Dragons is actually an anomaly in how their new editions work. For other games like Hero System, GURPS, or Call of Cthulhu, a new edition usually just meant clarifying a few rules and applying some errata. Meaning you could still use your old books if you had the errata. It's entirely within the realm of possibility that Double Cross falls into this camp, where an older edition isn't too different from the next one in the line. So to sum it up, in an abstract sort of way, Double Cross is very similar to Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. Both of them are very combat-heavy games that, if you play them strictly by the book, they'll very easily wind up being video games, sans the video. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there are at least a few differences between the 2 games. With all that said, I'm Aaron Dershadel, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, I've probably got a like button somewhere around here you can click to show the entire world that you think this is a good video. I'll also leave a subscribe annotation up for you, just in case you want to do that too. And if you want some more details about Double Cross, I've got other videos where I talk about it, but I'll also leave a link in the description where you can find more information.